Sup, rich hardcore kids. Today we're going to be talking about the first full-length album from Final Resting Place. This is called Third World Tribunal. This is the first full-length for this entire brutal hardcore genre, as I like to call it. Other bands like Fatal Realm and Adonia within this same little subgenre of brutal death metal slash hardcore fusion, still just releasing promos, singles, demos, EP. So it's finally nice to see a full length album. This on the shorter side, it's clocking in at 27 minutes. That's shorter than Destined to Fail. Speaking about Destined to Fail, that's where the first artwork for the band comes from with their first EP. Second EP comes from the Fetus Live album. This one, the artwork kind of looks, to me, it looked like Broken Hope, Grotesque Blessings, which I thought was really niche for this. And then someone showed me it actually looks a lot like Oppressor's 1996 album, which is super, super niche. I thought it was kind of funny. It's just two technical, brutal death metal albums from the 90s from Chicago, Illinois. So, of all places, so, there's that going for it, which I thought was cool. Now, a lot of people still don't understand what FRP is all about. Pretty much the hardcore side doesn't understand the late 90s New York death metal appeal of it. Stuff like Pyrexia with System of the Animal, Internal Bleeding with Driven to Conquer. You had stuff like End of One, Limb for Limb, Burning Human. What you know about Burning Human? Nothing. You need to get some ears. The brutal death metal side doesn't understand the beatdown 90s hardcore deathcore elements of stuff like 1 Second Thought, Denied, stuff like Dying Grace, Go to Mentees. Speaking about Go to Mentees, probably the closest thing musically to Final Resting Place, especially this release, is just very ADHD all over the place with Go to Mentees music, especially with the hardcore slam breakdowns, crazy time signatures. Reflects well into Final Resting Place's sound. There's also a slight 10% of the vocal influence I feel is MySpace deathcore. The vocals are very ADHD. It kind of reminded me of speaking of Broken Hope, of all bands, Broken Hope. It reminded me of a deathcore version of Joe Fichek from Broken Hope, with Dominic's vocals very just you kind of get that around. It's very I've never heard anything quite like it. It's bombastic, it's raw, it's gonna piss off a lot of people in a good way. It's just so crazy. I feel like it's gonna be one of them things where people don't understand it at first, but then it's gonna grow on people. I immediately was drawn to it. I thought it was very just original in the way it was, just rhyming offbeat, kind of Repudiation. And speaking of Repudiation and Torturement, also some niche giants from New York death metal from the 90s. You will notice the Entorchment logo, Final Resting Place's logo does pay tribute to Entorchment, but there's a lot of Entorchment and Repudiation parts in these tracks. I noticed a lot of just similar riffs and time signatures, and even stuff that isn't necessarily a Repudiation or an Entorchment part, but stuff that could easily be considered parts like that, because it just sounds just so similar. So it's finally paying homage to that more of that just brutal death metal side. There's a lot of blast beats here, a lot of crazy parts. The drums are probably my favorite part about this release, just something about the drums. And this also does have that raw FRP sound where it's just this terrible production. You can't hear the guitars, but you couldn't hear the guitars really on Purging of Impurity by Repudiation. So I'm used to this. I listen to a lot of raw, crappy 90s brutal death metal stuff like Flesh Grind and Deadened, so I'm used to hearing it. It's not bad where it's not purposely bad, by accident bad, something like Stillborn Malevolent Creation, or Breeding the Spawn Suffocation. This is obviously on purpose to give it that 90s street effect. It works well to me, because it makes you recognize that, like, hey, you are listening to Final Resting Place. They have a very signature sound, which a lot of these bands nowadays are lacking. Speaking about the guitar work, it's written by two different guitarists from the band. So one person did 4 songs, another person did another 4 songs. So you have different eras and different play styles here. You can kind of tell which one is the new guitarist and the old guitarist within the song. The new guitarist kind of has more blast beat sections, more like straight up brutal death metal riffs at the start. The old guitarist, you kind of get that, like, I guess, like, new metal kind of like groove oriented intro throughout the song. So there is that. Since it's so short, for this style, we're not playing guitar solos. It's not, this technical, faceless, necrophagous, crazy thing. It doesn't overstay its welcome to where you get bored of it. Whenever it starts to, like, get similar slightly to where, like, someone would skip a track, the vocal style changes, the drums do some, like, crazy flair, so they know how to keep it fresh. And I feel like this release is much more on the brutal death metal side. They're really embracing the brutal death metal side, which I think a lot of the hardcore kids, like the average fan of hardcore and deathcore music, is going to hear this and think that, this is like some sort of a downgrade. But I think that they are transcending the genre. I don't even consider them this brutal hardcore outfit. I think that this is much more pure of, like, pure brutal death metal slash deathcore, kind of like a continuation on exploring that early New York brutal death metal genre of the late 90s and that late 90s New York beatdown slash deathcore era, like I mentioned, System of the Animal, Driven to Conquer, End of One, 1 Second Thought, Denied. Like, it's all there blended into this brutal album that just transcends the genre. I didn't know how they were going to progress as a band. The genre of brutal death metal slash hardcore deathcore that they play is, mosh music, pit music. So it's very hard to have, 20, 30 songs when every song is just slamming and gutturals and a snare drum. But, they make it work with the amount of songs they have. So, you're getting some fresh new FRP. But if you didn't like the previous stuff and you were into brutal death metal and you just, for whatever reason, thought this was too big of a trend band or whatever it may be, to the hardcore side, I say give this a try, give it a listen. There's Pinch Harmonics, if you're into, like, Malignancy, Putridity, there's that for you. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of repudiation and torturement sound in this. Not so much of the, like, eternal suffering, dehumanized sound of, like, 90s East Coast brutal death metal, but it's much more of just like that bombastic, like, Entorchment was very ADHD, like this is very ADHD, and I applaud it for that. I love off-time signatures, the off-time vocals. It's just very unique. It's very, like, it's genius in the way of, like, you gotta really understand what the band is trying to do. It's just crazy. But, that's all I can say. I would give this a 9 out of 10. I thought this was a really solid release from FRP, which I think will be surprising to some, considering like the status of this band and the type of shows they be playing. They don't play much death metal shows, but they are pretty much just like a brutal death metal band playing hardcore shows rather than, like, a straight up hardcore band. So, take what you want from a band like this. I like it only because, I like it because I understand, again, what the band is, and I feel like a lot of people still don't understand what this is. Like, a lot of people just think that it's going to be, Scatter Remnants because it looked like Scatter Remnants. They think it's going to be, something like Despondency for, like, more of, like, the brutal death metal side, or even something like Devourment, coming from, like, brutal death metal. It's not that at all. And you know, it's like the deathcore of like good deathcore. You know, the good hours of deathcore, which like I mentioned, like you know, Dying Grace. You know, all this. Early late like everything's just like 90s, like there's no like modern like Job for a Cowboy, Whitechapel influence here, besides like a little bit of like the vocals, but not really, you know what I mean? But I applaud the new members. I feel like this is a lot more of a mature sound in Final Resting Place's music. So it gets a worthy 9 out of a 10. I actually really dug the vocals. You know, it's very just like... So, there you have it. Please do subscribe. Check out all of the bands that I mentioned because they kick ass. And until next time, peace out.